This happened just a few days ago. For reference, I frequent a certain local alt hangout spot just about every night to have a few drinks and hang out with my crowd of regulars, who are almost like my family. Spring break for a lot of people was last week, which meant that a lot of old friends and former regulars came back to town and spent some nights at the bar like old times. Among this disparate group of people is a friend of mine, whose identity I will protect by referring to them as Allison. Allison is very cute, but we were never that close and we never hooked up, so I'm courteously stuck in the friend zone, so to speak. But that's not a problem for me, as I'm not interested in making things weird between us or forcing myself into a long-distance relationship. I can be a gentleman. Anyway, Allison likes to drink a lot. Most of us around this place have some kind of developing substance issue. Since she's a small, attractive female, all of her friends, myself included, make sure to look out for her when she gets drunk, just to make sure that nobody gets a chance to try anything nefarious. Recently, though, something despicable very nearly happened. It was the night of St. Patrick's Day, and I was very drunk and high after hanging out with my old friends who were in town. I had a blackout between 2 and 3 in the morning, but by 4 I was back in my body and sobering up. The only people still hanging out at the time were myself, Allison, a friend of mine, and the owner of the establishment. We bummed around for a while until about 5, when the owner finally kicked us out. I left just me, Allison, and our mutual friend in the parking lot. We were having our last little chat for the night and about to say goodbye when something very unexpected happened. Allison's ex-boyfriend, Lily Freaking, appeared out of nowhere, just pulling up to the parking lot in the middle of the night. I hadn't seen him around all evening, and it's not uncommon for Allison to sleep in her car after everyone else leaves. So it was quite obvious to all 3 of us that he had come just to see her. I'll call him Josh. When he appeared, all 3 of us traded a look. I was immediately glad that I and my friend were still there, and that Josh hadn't successfully pulled up on Allison while she was alone, as if he had pulled up just a few minutes later, he would have been knocking on her car door in an otherwise completely empty parking lot. It's less important, but Josh is a little older and a cocaine addict and wants Allison to be his little punk rock doll. They split months ago, the last time Allison left town, but Mance has been picking the scab the entire time. He won't just move on, you know. It's not like any of us hated him, it's just that he's not a good match, and everybody can see that except him. Of course, he started acting extremely clingy that night. We were all pretty much wasted except for him, and I could tell by the way he looked at us that he knew this. When he started to stand so close to Allison that she took steps away and tried to hug her for old times' sakes or whatever he said, I went back to the back door of the bar and tried to get the owner to come out to help survey the situation. But unfortunately, the whole place was locked up and his car was gone already. By the time I got back, my old friend was saying goodbye. I dapped him up and I pulled him in a bit, trying to give him a look in the eyes that said, "Don't you dare leave." But he didn't get it. Then it was just me, Allison, and Josh. Allison tried to say goodnight and sleep in her car, but this was the moment that Josh had been waiting for since he saw the rest of us there. He said, "No, that's not safe. Let me just give you a ride home." I immediately tried to counteract this by saying how she's always done this, and it's never been a problem, and how Allison had been talking about sleeping in her car for almost an hour, and probably just wanted to follow through with what she had planned. But none of this worked. Josh was extremely pushy, and I never put my foot down hard enough. Eventually, Allison caved and accepted the ride. We all said goodbye and got into our cars, then sat in the parking lot for a minute. The whole time I heard this voice in my head that told me not to let her get in the car with him, but I was so fated I could barely listen to it. However, I was still in the presence of mind to look out for my friend, despite how nervous I was about the situation. As they pulled out, I got in line behind them. We rolled through to the exit together, where we both should have turned right, but then Josh made a left turn. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew full well that Allison didn't live down that way, but it seemed like Josh was counting on me not knowing her well enough to be aware of that. But he was wrong. Took a deep breath and gave him about 5 seconds of follow distance, then made a left turn to follow them. I left plenty of room, but made sure I could still see where they were going. Had to run 2 red lights just to not let them get too far ahead, though, which made me worried that I was about to get pulled over or something. The longer I went on with them going the wrong way, the more sure I was that something was up. Eventually, Josh made another left turn into a side street. I sped up and careened into the turn, knowing they could make another random turn and lose me, but I wasn't even sure if they were aware I was following them. As soon as I made the turn, though, I swore I couldn't see them. There were no tail lights on the road, but luckily there weren't too many other turns that they could have made. Luckily, just a few seconds later, as I was slowly rolling through the neighborhood, I saw Josh's car. They were parked on the side of the street with their lights already off. I swore again, with malice and anger this time, then pulled up in the spot right in front of his car. I left it running in park and quickly got out. I didn't even have a second to look out into their windshield because they were both already getting out. It was a hectic few seconds that followed. Allison slammed the door behind her and ignored both of us completely, walking to my car with her arms crossed, jumping into my passenger seat and slamming the door too. The whole time, Josh was yelling at her to come back. He even started to walk up to her, but I stopped him. I don't even think I said anything to him. I just gave him a look that told him to back off. I clenched his jaw in a way that made me tense up, expecting a sucker punch to come my way. But then, he just pushed me back and muttered something venomous as he turned around and got back into his car. In that moment, actually, I was the most afraid, because in this country, somebody you're in a fight with, getting back into their car means 2 things. Either backing off or grabbing their gun. I literally ran back into my car and sped off faster than I ever have in my life. Once I got back on the road and on the way to Allison's house, I tried talking to her, but she was totally clammed up and curled into a ball in my passenger seat. The most I got was when I asked if I needed to call the police, and to that I got a very slight head shake to indicate no. When we were passing the bar, she finally spoke, asking me to not drop her off at home and let her sleep in her car. I obliged, figuring she probably didn't want to interact with her parents. I helped her in and made sure it was locked up. Then I sat in my car and watched over her until sunrise, when other cars finally started pulling in. The next day, she was back at the bar and trying her best to act normal. When I got her inside, I asked her about it again and double-checked if I should have called the cops. She again said no, but this time added that it was only because I got there when I did. My heart sank when she said that, and I told her she should at least tell a few close friends about this, to which she agreed. Now, Josh is basically the same on-site order as a neo-Nazi. We may not be the best group of our friends on account of how we enable each other's self-destructive habits. But god damn it, when it comes to certain things, we look out for each other, and assault of this sort is something you're lucky to just get beaten for. During spring break of my senior year of high school, I went on a trip to the beach with my group of friends. My best friend Tyler went too. His dad just bought a condo right on the beach, but he hadn't set it up to rent it out yet, so he let us party in it for a few days, as long as we didn't wreck the place. Nothing sounded better than multiple nights of living completely carefree and hanging out with just the people we liked, especially since there were girls involved. Even if the place was a little bare bones and some of us would end up sleeping on couches or air mattresses. That didn't matter so much because, of course, we all pitched on a couple of bottles and a few cases of beer, which we would be passing around the whole time. Tyler was initially apprehensive about having alcohol inside the condo, as he was worried about getting caught by his dad and not being allowed to party there ever again. Everybody convinced him it wasn't a big deal though, and to make it more tempting since it was his condo, we let him drink as much as he wanted without having to pay his share. Admittedly, that was not a great idea because, for being the one who was nervous about it, Tyler drank more than any of us. Some of the guys gave him flack for it and said he was taking advantage of the fact that he didn't have to buy any of it. But then it was already too late because a new kind of father was unleashed and he was just knocking back the drinks. I was his best friend, which made me feel like I had to keep up with him. None of us were experienced drinkers, so there was no thought about anyone staying at all sober to take care of the rest of us. By the time the sun set on the first evening, we were all wasted. The hours dragged on, the music kept blasting, and there were games played. Some people got sick and some people were caught getting it on. But after a while, things started to die down. There was a point at which we were all winding down and all sitting around the living room, not really talking or doing anything. That's when Tyler jumped up out of nowhere and made a bunch of noise, trying to get us all hyped again. He kept saying stuff like, "It's only midnight, you quitters. The night is still young." And he was walking around to everybody, handing them drinks, all while he was slamming beers too. We were all pretty tired, so we didn't exactly respond to it until he had a different idea. "Hey everyone, let's go to the beach," he shouted at the top of his lungs. I can hear those words ringing through my head to this day. It was such a bad idea, still, and I don't know why, but as soon as he said it, we all agreed instantly and shot up to party again. We didn't want to get more drunk just to keep sitting around, but we were definitely down for something else to do. There was a brief moment where one of us mentioned that it was the middle of the night and nobody was supposed to go to the beach around then. Then, that was answered with enthusiasm instead of deterring us. It was going to be so cool to have the beach to ourselves and be there at the wrong time of the day. There were so many of us together, what could go wrong? We killed the first bottle right then and there, and we each slammed another beer or two before heading out. We hadn't even changed out of our clothes into our bathing suits. It seemed like it was the perfect happenstance, too, that the beach was right on our doorstep. We didn't even have to cross a single street to get there. That was the most dangerous part about being a bunch of drunk fools in the dark, I figured, so it was fine. Tyler was on a roll with the suggestions and said we should all go skinny dipping. Again, we all thought that was very exciting. Everybody had at least one other person there that they wanted to see naked, so it was a shame that it was a new moon and we could barely see anything. That made it less nerve-wracking though, so even if you were self-conscious, you couldn't get out of it, really. Then just like that, we all took off what little clothes we were wearing and left them in the sand before charging into the water. It was surprisingly cold for mid-March, but we were so drunk we had no problem powering through it. We waited out against the crashing waves until our feet weren't touching the ground. Tyler wanted to keep going, but the girls stopped because they were a lot shorter than us and were already treading water for a while. So of course, most of the guys stayed with them. Tyler, on the other hand, hadn't been hitting on any of them and was basically in his own world that sometimes had me involved in it, so he pressed on, breaking out into a full-on swim. I chased after him, trying to keep in my line of sight, but unfortunately the waves were really high even though they weren't breaking on us anymore. I started to feel sick from the motion, like I might throw up all my drinks straight into the ocean. That, and I was getting cold and tired. Eventually I stopped and treaded water. I couldn't see Tyler anymore. I called his name, but there was no response. Not a shout back, not even splashing. I swam out a little further and I called his name again, as loud as I could, but still just silence. My heart started pounding and I felt my throat closing up. I don't even know if it was the cold or just being scared of losing my friend, but it was probably a combination of both. I kept calling his name for a while until I eventually started to feel exhausted from treading water. Eventually, I heard the rest of my friends calling out to us to come back. I was surprised how quiet they sounded, as I hadn't realized how far we swam out. Reluctantly, knowing I didn't have much energy left, I turned back and swam toward the sound of their voices until I could stand again. I was hoping beyond hope that Tyler was with them. In the darkness, I couldn't make out much detail, but I could tell they had all gotten cold or bored and were standing on the beach, waiting for us. As I dragged myself up to them, completely drained, my heart sank when I counted one less person than there should have been. "Where's Tyler?" I asked them right away. There was a short pause, and they all looked at each other with concern, then said they thought he was with me. In a last-ditch hope, I thought maybe he had gotten around all of us and was the first to get back to the pile of clothes and get dressed. We all ran over there and picked out our clothes, putting them on, and seeing to our horror that Tyler's trunks were still there. I ran back to the ocean, but my friend stopped me from going back in, saying it was better to wait for him to come back. We shined lights out into the abyss and called his name 100 times, but we couldn't see or hear a damn thing. Not a single sign of him. After about 20 or 30 minutes, one of us had to make the call to 911. We were a petrified, shivering, sloppy mess, all of us. The cops asked us questions but didn't suspect foul play. They said they would have to wait until daybreak to send a search party out into the water, but it never got to that point. While we were all standing there, Tyler's body washed ashore. When I was a kid, I had really strict parents. They, of course, never let me stay home from school, so finally getting a break was always something me and my siblings looked forward to. One year, when we were all about middle school age, we got the idea to try staying up late during spring break. We didn't have a lot of money, so the three of us shared just one bedroom. We would always try to whisper to each other at night while trying to fall asleep. But if our dad ever caught us, well, it was bad. Although, when you're a kid, you don't have the perspective on just how bad it is, so nobody, even the ones who had it the worst, are immune to the itch for mischief. We didn't want to stay up all night because we knew our dad would be able to tell that we hadn't slept. We aimed to stay up until midnight, which was super late for us because we were never allowed to be up past 9, and that was a hard and fast rule. For the first few hours, everything was fine. We were super quiet and nervous, and we were always listening out for footsteps in the hallway. There were a couple of times that our dad tried to barge in on us, but we always heard him coming and got into position to look like we were sleeping just in time. It was a super fun game for us. It made our hearts pound. It was more entertainment than we were usually allowed, and it was all our own fun. When midnight came around, we turned in, but we quickly came to realize that of all the excitement and adrenaline, none of us could sleep. That's when we got up again and said that this time we'd go to bed by 2, and then we got the fun going again. Unfortunately, we didn't realize how tired we were at that point. We weren't nearly as sharp or alert as we thought we were, and we were definitely bolder and cared a lot less about everything. Eventually, something funny happened, and we all started laughing and couldn't stop. We couldn't even contain the volume of our voices. It's no surprise that that's when we got caught. Our dad barged in and started screaming at us, calling us no good and stupid and disobedient and all sorts of stuff like that, as he usually did when we got in trouble. We were all waiting for the mass-ass beating. But then something altogether scarier happened. After he yelled at us for a few minutes, our mom came around the corner and gave our dad some kind of look. We didn't know what it meant in the moment, but right away all the loud anger was drained out of our dad, and we were left with just the quiet anger. For some reason, the calm, quiet punishments are 1,000 times more terrifying than the loud, out-of-control ones. We had no idea what was about to happen. We definitely didn't expect what he did next. Tillis thought to get dressed and said we were going to go for a ride in the car. Usually that's supposed to be a reward, but we knew that this was somehow going to be a punishment. Our mom stayed home and the rest of us packed into the car, which was a 1990-something Oldsmobile. I was in the front seat and my little sisters were in the back. As we drove away from the house, our dad started talking to us in an extremely tense and bitter but reserved tone. He said that if we wanted to be night owls and stay up past our bedtimes, then he was going to show us where we would end up. First, he took us to the bar. All he did was park in the parking lot and roll the windows down, but then we were subjected to all the douchebaggery that occurs in a parking lot at 1:30 in the morning of a bar. It was extremely uncomfortable for us. People were shouting and fighting and pissing out in the open, and some of them even saw that there were kids in the car and started to lean in and talk to us like we were just so interesting and entertaining. We could smell the liquor on them. It's hard to describe what it's like to be that young and see people that are that messed up, that they aren't even all together there. After the bar closed, my dad kept going. He took us to the bad side of town and drove around, pointing out all the homeless people and addicts and dealers. And then he took us around to the red lights. There was this one street where about half a dozen prostitutes dressed in barely any clothes were standing around. My dad rolled up to them. And at first, even they looked confused, but he pulled out a lot of cash. I'm sure it wasn't much, but it ended up being for work that was easier than what they would usually do. I'm sure. I don't know what he said to them, but that's when two of them got on the other side of the car and leaned into the windows, seriously invading our personal spaces. The woman that was by me caressed me on the shoulder and pulled me super close to her face, saying all these things to me, like whether I would want to be treated by her, or if I'd rather let my dad sell me to her pimp so they could turn me into one of them. We all started to cry. It was too much for us, and it was horribly traumatizing. Once we were all completely broken down, my dad finally took us home. As heinous as it was, it did very effectively scare us out of staying up late or going out into town until we were old enough to start getting into our own rebellious phases. Although I still wonder what all those people who saw a bunch of small children in a car in the middle of the night had to be thinking. Surely they wouldn't have expected our father was intentionally subjecting his children to all the horrors of nighttime in the city. But that's the truth. Ever had a creepy experience? Share it in the comments. Subscribe for more horror like this. You never know what's lurking next.